Before we go into looking at a different spawn system, I want to first fix an issue which I may have forgotten. My apologies. In your enemy system blueprints, if you go to your BPI zombie base and select your BP zombie base self, and then on the right side, if you search for possess, you would actually see a pawn option for auto possess AI. Now make sure that you select this and make this as placed in world or spawned. What this basically does is, in default, it's set to placed in world. That means the AI controller for this specific zombie will only take possession of the zombie if it is already placed in world. For all purposes, just select place in world or spawned. This gives you the ability to place a zombie in the world and also have them spawn using a script. In both cases, the AI controller will take control of the zombie. Once again, my apologies. I may have not recorded this part when I actually changed it. So with that being said, let's go into the actual spawner system again. Now today, I want to show you how to spawn the zombie based on the trigger collision itself. So first, let's go ahead and duplicate the spawn zone. So I'm going to hold on Alt on my keyboard and then just drag it so I can create another zone here. Select the edit BP, and this is going to open up your BP spawn zone. We only have one blueprint for it, and it's all being shared between all of the zones. So first thing that we're going to do is to create that collision event. So we're going to right click on the spawn zone and then add event. Now, all of these events come built into the Unreal Engine for each collision zone, and you can use any of these events to trigger different functionality. For example, for our purpose, we're going to take a look at when the player steps onto the zone. And also, I'm going to show you how to use the when the player steps off of the zone. So let's start with add on component begin overlap. As soon as you select it, it's going to add this event node. And this event node will trigger anytime anything steps over that zone. For example, if I go ahead and press put in a print string, and I can just look at other actor and then just connect it to the string, so it will give me the other actor's name. If I press play, you'll see on the top left-hand side of the screen, it's showing me the name of the zombie blueprint class as they spawn in to the map. So this component doesn't really matter who, what, when, where. As soon as somebody steps in to this collision box, it's going to fire this function. And we're going to use this to check to see if it is the player who has stepped into the collision box. And if it is, then we're going to go ahead and spawn the zombie. So we're going to drag off of this other actor, and we're going to do a check. We're going to do an equal, drag off of this select asset, and we're going to get our player character. This is the cheapest way to take a look at to see if this is your player character without having to cast. Cast is expensive, so we want to use this method. So now that we have a branch that's going to tell us, yes, it is the player who stepped in there, and or no, it's not the player who stepped in there, we need to now use a function to notify the game that the player has stepped inside of this collision box so we can proceed with spawning. The problem that you will face is that the manager, as soon as the game starts, the manager is going to start firing the zombie spawn function, and the zombies are going to constantly keep spawning in. So we need to tell the manager, hey, if the player is not touching the collision box, then don't spawn the zombies. Wait until the player gets into the box before you spawn the zombie. We can do this simply by just adding in a new Boolean function. So add in a new variable and check to see, is trigger active? I'll put a question mark in there. And we're going to drag this is trigger active and then set this to true. So what this basically is going to do is if the player steps inside of this collision box, then this Boolean is going to activate and it's going to say it's true. Now let's go ahead and use this Boolean to actually spawn in the zombies. For that, first we're going to create a new custom event. And then this will be called check underscore trigger status. And this check trigger status is going to have two inputs. The first one is the max spawn count. And the second one is our spawn delay. The max spawn count is going to be an integer. Spawn delay is going to be a float. In our spawn manager, drag off of the array element and then call for check underscore trigger status. There it is. And then connect this off of triggered. And these two variables, you can just copy it and paste it down here and then plug it in to the function just like this. In our spawn zone, technically, we need to now look at this handle instance spawns and we need to plug it in here. And we only want this connection between the check trigger status and the handle instance spawn to work if it is trigger active. Now, you could easily go and say, hey, get the trigger active and then do a branch and connect this off of true. The problem that you're going to have is, number one, as soon as the game starts, the trigger is set to false. That means this is what's going to be firing when the check trigger status event is called. And number two, the spawn manager will only call this event once when the game starts. So you're going to trigger this event and it's going to see that the trigger active is false and it's just going to fail and you will never be able to spawn the zombies. So we need a way to continuously keep checking this trigger active and trigger this handle instance spawns when it is true. Yes, you could use an event tick. It may be a little bit expensive to use an event tick. So instead, we're going to use something called a macro. A macro is basically another type of function that you can initiate to do a repetitive task that you need to continuously keep doing the same thing again and again until a different result is rendered. So let me show you how that is done. Right between your functions and your variables, you should have this macro. And click on plus and you're going to get a new macro. And this macro, we're going to go ahead and rename it. And we're going to name this as check underscore trigger. Inside this macro, you have an input and an output. So as soon as the macro is called, the input is going to run and it's going to do whatever the function that you're going to define inside of this. And then it's going to trigger the output based on your condition. So what that basically means is if you drag in your trigger active and then do a branch here, you can drag this execution pin and you can just put it on top of input and that will create your input node. So when the macro runs, it's going to immediately check for this branch. And we only want this macro to stop running or finish its run when the branch is true. So we are going to go ahead and drag our true onto the output and that's going to give you this true output. Compile and save it. And if it is false, because we do want to define what happens if it is false, because now this macro, again, just like any other event, is only going to run once unless you put it in a loop. So the easiest way to put it in a loop is off of false, we're going to do a quick delay. And we'll do like 0.2. This is perfectly fine. And off of completed, we're just going to drag it and connect it to the beginning of this branch. So as long as the trigger active is false, it's going to wait 2 seconds and it's going to check again. And it's going to run through this again and again until the trigger active is set to true. If it is, then it's going to output this true node. So now in our event graph, we're going to go ahead and drag this check trigger in between here, just like this. Plug the execution in, and then also offer true, we're going to plug in this handle instance spawns. The max spawn count and also the spawn delay, go ahead and plug it in here, and then compile and save. Now, what this will do is if you go into your game and if you run over to your triggered spawn zone that we have set up, nothing's spawning in here. Everything else has a spawn, nothing is spawning in here. If I go ahead and have the player step inside of the zone, you'll notice that the zombies are going to start spawning in. And again, it's going to do the exact same thing as your instant zombie. As soon as it's done spawning its max amount, there's no more zombies that's going to spawn in. Even if I step inside of this trigger and activate the trigger again, nothing is going to spawn extra because remember, our spawn manager is actually controlling the maximum amount of zombies that could be spawned off of this trigger. Now, the last type of zombie spawns that we're going to look at is the independent trigger. And the independent trigger is basically when the player steps in a trigger that is disconnected from our spawn zone, then it's going to go ahead and spawn in the zombies. Right now, if I enter the zone, the zombie is going to spawn in. But in the independent trigger function, we're going to create a separate collision that is separate off of this zone, and we're going to spawn the zombie when the player steps on it. So let's go to our content drawer and create a new blueprint class of type active. This is going to be BP underscore player trigger for zombie. You can name it however you like, but I'm just trying to name it literally so it makes sense. Inside of here, we're going to add the same box collision. You can use box collision, sphere collision. Everything acts the same. Box collision is just something that I always work with. And I'm going to name this the spawn trigger. Compile and save it. in our event begin play, as soon as the game starts, I'm going to do a delay until next tick just to make sure that our spawn manager is ready in the game. We're going to get the actor of class, which is going to be our spawn manager. And off of the spawn manager, now we're going to get the maximum spawn count and also get the spawn interval. And both of these, we want to promote this to a variable, just like this. So what this will do is it will still respect the max spawn count and also the max spawn interval time based on the spawn manager. So now we're going to right click on the spawn trigger and we're going to add an event and we're going to call in on component begin overlap. We're going to do the exact same thing like we did previously. Drag off of the other actor. We're going to check to see if this actor is our get player character. If this actor is the same, then we need to spawn the zombie. So it's all going to work good, but how do we tell where to spawn the zombie? For this, you can actually have a variable set up based on your zone. So let's create a new variable, and this would be called our spawn underscore zone underscore trigger. And make this of type BP underscore spawn zone. This is basically our spawn zone blueprint. And make sure this is instance editable and also expose on spawn. And because we made this a object reference, we didn't make this as a class reference. As you can see, this is an object reference. The default value, you have to actually select it in the level, which is what we want. We're going to set up our spawn zone trigger in just a moment once we finish this function. We're going to drag our spawn zone trigger here, and we're going to call in our handle instance spawns only when it's true. And we're going to connect our max spawn count and also our spawn interval time here. Compile and save it. And one more thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to select the spawn trigger and I'm going to go for hidden in game and set this to false so I can see the spawn trigger in the game so you can see it as well when you're debugging. So now in our game, we're going to open up our content drawer, drag in our player spawn trigger, and we're just going to put it down there. Let me stretch this out so it has a big area for the player to walk through and save it. Now, while having the box trigger selected or the player trigger selected, you will see under default values, you have your spawn zone trigger and you have a drop down. And you can either choose the drop down or you can just use this pick actor from scene tool, and then you can pick the spawn zone. Sometimes it's a little difficult because it's like a very thin line. So you can choose which spawn zone should this trigger work with. You can pick any of these spawn zones. So this is a third type of spawn. So our spawn type, either instant or triggered, is not going to work. So we need to create a new type of spawn here. So we're going to open up our enumeration, add in a new enumerator, and this would be our player triggered. And then save it. In our spawn manager, where we have player triggered, we're not going to do anything. In our level editor, our spawn type, we're going to change this to player triggered. So now if we press play, you can see the collision box that we just created. And as soon as the player walks into the collision box, you'll see that the zombies are going to start spawning in. Now, this spawn system is really, really good if you're going to have the player go through a tunnel or through a door. And then you can put this trigger inside of the tunnel or in the beginning of a door or outside the door. So as soon as the player steps into this and trigger and open the door, the zombies are already readily available. So this saves on your performance because you don't have to have the zombie alive if there's like a wall or something in between the player and the tunnel. And this is something that big game companies do use. They do turns and they have doors, they have tunnels, although they have cutscenes, and they use all of that to have these player triggered spawns. So they don't have zombies just spawning and waiting in the game. Just like those ones over there, they're spawning and waiting in the game until the player reaches, and every single zombie is going to affect your performance. So the best and optimal way that you should be looking at spawning your zombies is using a trigger like this. So the last thing I want to show you here is to kind of kill the zombies when the player leaves the area, because you do want to do some culling. It's called culling. When the zombie or when the player is far away from the zombies or the player has reached a completely new area, we want to go ahead and kill the zombies. Now, there's two ways to going on about killing the zombies. Let me show you the one simplest way possible right now. we're going to go ahead and open up our player trigger. We're going to add the on component end overlap. Now this is going to expand our function a little bit more, so bear with me here. So on the component end overlap, basically this is when the player leaves the trigger box. We're going to check to make sure that it is the player that is going to leave. So I'm going to copy this branch, the equal, and the get player character, and connect this to other actor and also the branch. Because we don't want this to function if a zombie steps inside of that zone and it steps off. We don't want to go and delete zombies from the map, right? And we're going to drag in our spawn zone. And we want to now call in a function to delete the zombies. But if I just go ahead and take a look at all the zombies inside of the zone and then try to delete it, it's not really going to work. We need to now create a system to track all the zombies that are being spawned inside of that zone, so that we can now go ahead and call in a function to delete them. So in our BP spawn zone, we're going to go to our spawn zombies function. Just after we validate to make sure that the zombie has spawned in, we're going to just move these function just a little bit here. We're going to drag off this return value and we're going to promote it to variable. And we're going to call this spawned underscore zombie underscore array. And immediately we're going to delete this so that we have the variable here. Select the variable and make this of type array. Drag this zombie spawn array here, do a get. We're going to drag off of this and we're going to add the zombies to this array. So drag this return value, plug it in here, and then off of valid, we're going to connect this add, and then connect the execution of the add to the correct zombie count ++. Now, what this effectively does is every zombie that's going to spawn into our zone, it's going to keep track of all of these zombies. So for us to now go ahead and delete the zombies when the player leave the trigger, we're going to create an event. So in our event graph, we're going to create a custom event, and this would be delete all zombies in zone. So here we're going to drag in our spawned array, and we're going to do a for each loop. Connect this here. And for the loop body, first we need to make sure that the zombie is still valid. This is to prevent any type of errors in the event that this function runs faster than the delete function, or it deletes faster than this function can finish its loop. So we want to make sure that it's valid. And if it is valid, then we want to drag off of this array element, and we're going to call in our destroy actor function and connect this off of is valid. Compile and save. Now in our player trigger, on component end overlap, off of this spawn trigger zone, we're going to call in the delete all zombies in zone function here. And what this will do, if you go in game, let's go ahead and step into the trigger. It's going to spawn in the zombie. At the same time it's spawning the zombie, it's going to add it to the array that the player has created, the variable. Now, if I step off of the zone, you would actually notice all the zombie got deleted, and the rest of the zones are independent of each other. So this delete is not going to impact the other zones. Now remember, our player trigger has specifically chosen this spawn zone as its spawn zone trigger. So that's why anything and everything that this trigger is going to do, it's only going to impact this zone. If I step into the zone, you'll see all the zombies are going to spawn in. And if I step off of the zone, the zombies are going to get deleted. But if I go ahead and step into the zone again, nothing's going to happen. That's because our maximum zombie count in our zone has been reached, but we never did anything to reset it. So go to your BP spawn zone where we have our delete all zombies function. After we destroy the actor, we're going to drag in our current zombie count, and then we're going to do a minus minus. This is a decrement integer. This should reduce the current zombie count by 1 for each and every single zombie that is being destroyed. Now, as a failsafe, off of completed, we want to get our current zombie count, and we want to set this to 0. So what this will allow us to do is, when you run this function, this will guarantee that at the end of cleaning up all the zombies, it will make sure that your current zombie count is at 0. Now, if you go ahead and play the game, and if you step into the player trigger, you'll see all the zombies are going to spawn in. However, if you step out, you will notice that the zombie spawns in again one more time. Again, if I step in, nothing's going to happen. If I step out, they're kind of like doing a little twitch, but then they're respawning in. The reason why you're having that problem is if you open up your handle instant spawns, this timer function is going to spawn zombies indefinitely in a looping mode. That means when our max zombie count is reached, this function is still running in the background, but it's waiting for that current zombie count to drop so that it can replace it with another zombie. So if you were to kill a zombie in this function, as soon as one zombie dies, another one will spawn in. That's what this looping is going to do. Now, the way that we're going to break this function from looping is drag off of this return value, and we're going to promote it to a variable and call this spawn zombies underscore timer. And in our event graph, just before we go ahead and delete the zombies, we're going to drag in our spawn zombies timer and do a get. Drag off of this, and we're going to go ahead and clear and invalidate this timer by handle. Now, when you compile and save and if you play, as soon as you step into the trigger, the zombies are going to spawn in. And as soon as you step off, the zombies will delete and they won't respawn anymore. Again, step in to spawn, and then you back out to delete them. Again, any direction doesn't really matter. As long as you step in and out of this trigger, the zombies are going to spawn in and they're going to delete themselves. And again, this is independent of each and every other zone that is present in the game. This spawn zone will still function as soon as you step in, just like any other. This type of function, you can actually use it if you're creating a game mode where the player is being chased by the zombie and the player has to reach an objective. And as soon as the player reaches the objective, then you can go ahead and delete all the zombies behind it. You can always create a completely new player trigger and use one for spawning the zombie and one for killing the zombie, and you could achieve the same exact results. All right, folks, so that's all I wanted to show you in terms of the spawn. Our next video is going to be interesting because this is where we're going to actually start shooting the zombie and killing it. So I'm looking forward to showing you that video myself. So if you are interested in that video, please hit the like button and also subscribe to the channel so you get notified as soon as that video gets released. Go try out this function and let me know how that works for you. I'll catch you all in the next video.